In the beginning, before time, before space, before light, there was only God. The Father conceived everything that ever would exist. He imagined it. Every law of motion, every atom, every soul, held perfectly in his infinite intellect. That divine thought, that eternal plan, is not chaos. It is order itself, harmony, the architecture of being itself. So then came the Logos, not just the word as we casually translate it, but the divine pattern, the reason, the rational structure that gives shape to everything that is, was, and ever will be. The Logos is Christ, the expression of the Father's thought made reality, the pattern through which the universe was spoken into existence. And with that act of divine will, light burst forth. From an infinitesimal point of nothingness, energy exploded outward in the Big Bang, the instant where the Father's conception and the Logos pattern became matter. All at once, pure energy became substance. E equals mc squared in reverse. Energy condensed into matter, forming the first particles, quarks, gluons, electrons, neutrinos. As the universe cooled, these joined into protons and neutrons, the building blocks of atoms. At first, only hydrogen and helium filled creation. These are the simplest elements, and they were born minutes after this primordial flash. For hundreds of millions of years, the cosmos was a sea of light gas, but gravity, another expression of divine order, drew it together into great clouds, and the first stars ignited. Inside those stellar furnaces, hydrogen fused into helium, helium into carbon and oxygen, silicon and sulfur. Each generation of stars built upon the ashes of the one before it, climbing the elemental ladder in the furnaces of the stars. And towards that limit of creation, iron and nickel, the heaviest elements that ordinary stars could forge, were created before the light went out. And when they died, they didn't fade quietly. They collapsed and detonated as supernova, scattering their elements across the galaxy, dust laced with iron, nickel, and the seeds of every heavier atom. Now, these explosions, they were the crucibles of all future worlds. Out of that dust, 4.6 billion years ago, our solar system formed. Nickel atoms, born into these stellar deaths, drifted through space until they were pulled into a new gravitational dance. They were swirling, they were colliding and spiraling and coalescing into the planet that we call home. And here's the miracle of it all. Because nickel is heavy, it sank towards Earth's center, merging with iron into a molten core. That core, that divine heart of metal, it spins and it generates the electromagnetic field that shields our world from solar radiation. Without nickel, the solar wind would strip away the air and the oceans, and the Earth could not endure. So before we mined it, or melted it, or traded it, or even really discovered what it was, nickel saved us. It has been saving us since creation. It's been holding our atmosphere, steering our compasses, protecting our DNA from the fury of the sun. When we dig it up now, when we shape it into armor, aircraft, or NP2 nickel wire, we are reforging the very material that first made our existence possible. It's the same metal that once glowed in the hearts of dying stars, now helping power the engines that carry us back towards them. We live inside a harmonic pattern, a universe that began as thought, expressed as order, and made manifest as matter. Nickel is part of that divine symphony, a note struck first in the order of creation, still resonating through every machine, every magnetic field, every living heartbeat on Earth. And that's why I have a soft spot for nickel. It isn't just a commodity, it's the ancient alloy of creation itself. Welcome as we discover and learn about nickel. If you really think about nickel, it's the reason we exist. Without a nickel iron core of the Earth, we'd have no electromagnetic field and we wouldn't exist. Our DNA would be toast. So nickel's pretty damn important. You know, its discovery was so late in the process of technological evolution. I mean, nickel literally was translated as the devil's copper because they were like, "What the fuck is this? It looks like copper, but it
So that's
doesn't
the first
work
time I
like
heard that. No
copper."
way.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
mean that's the origin of the word. They're like this shit is just obnoxious. And then finally, I guess in the late 1800s, they discovered it as an element, or sometime in the 1800s. And then over time, they began to understand its unique uses. I mean, you can go to 80 to 90% its melting point, and it has the same integrity. I mean, that's that's God's element right there. I mean, that's something that you can, you can put into steel, and all of a sudden you've got an alloy that can be resistant. So something that was, I want to frame this as, nickel, was forged in the stars, and it's what keeps us going on planet Earth. But literally be what gets us back to the stars because of its heat resistance, its
Absolutely.
resiliency, like as
In
far as
extreme
in rockets.
environments. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you really think about extreme environments, I mean, that's how we get nickel here on planet Earth, because of the unique tropical climate, the heat, the rain, washing away all the lighter elements, and sort of doing some refinement through the climate. And all of a sudden, in Indonesia, you've got this deposit that you can get to relatively easily. So,
Yeah.
I want to hear whatever you have to say about nickel in itself and why it matters to like modern industry, the defense space, applications in aerospace. I mean, I think of it in
Yeah.
terms of if we went to war. Let's talk like World War II level conflict. Pretty quickly, the civilian market would be going to scrap, and all the ore in our allied countries would be reserved for defense applications, for armor, for shielding, for electronics, for wiring, for batteries, and
Yeah.
even to some extent, batteries would get put into second place for electronics and armor. And then when you run out of the ore, what happens? Well, you'd have to have a secure pipeline for raw ore, which means like in a place like Indonesia, we'd have to do some sort of treaty to even allow the ore off the island without it being smelted. So now you really need
Mhm.
to develop refineries,
Yeah.
or you need
That's the
to,
key.
yeah.
Refinery here is the key. Where where China right now has around 70% of the refining of nickel products in the entire world, and more specifically, 70% of Class One nickel. And the Class One nickel is exactly what we need to do everything you just talked about. That is the concern. Is the ability to get to that raw commodity, which we do have in Canada. There's lots of it. It's hard rock, and right now it's not economical. Go into wartime, anything becomes economical, and then
But you got to
the
build it.
price tag's gone.
You'd have to build the
But you have
refineries.
to build the infrastructure. There's 4 refineries in Canada. You have one pilot refinery in the United States. There are 49 active nickel smelters in Indonesia. It's night and day.
I mean, it's also the ease of getting nickel out of that deposit in Indonesia. Can you explain
It's
to me a
so
little bit about the climate and the geology there that makes Indonesia, the Philippines, and those tropical environments so conducive for getting access to nickel ore?
I believe, and I've been calling it, it's God's gift to mankind.
It really
Time and
is.
God did the work, where all of this mineralization was there, and then it rose above sea level, and over much, much time, with all of the tropical weather, the storms, everything was the perfect environment for this not only to collect all of the nickel that's in there, and also there's cobalt, scandium, and rare earths and other things in these laterites as well. But the biggest thing is that it weathered it. I went out there personally now twice on our site, and I can take a rock and crush it with my hand. That's how soft it is. And that's why this whole 30 meters or so above the bedrock is all economic ore. You can take that, it just depends what percentage it is. And some of it goes, it's limonite, it goes to an HPAL processor that makes something called MHP. MHP is incredibly important for creating EV batteries, but also being shipped elsewhere to have it further refined. Or the higher grade saprolite, that goes to the RKEF smelters, and that's used for your stainless steel, but also being used into matte. And then that matte is then exported out of country, and that's refined to Class 1 nickel. So it really is the perfect case of it's the right location, it has the right environment, the right amount of time, and it's so easy to mine compared to a hard rock where you've got to dig down. It costs you hundreds of millions to set up an operation. There, quite literally, you can grab an excavator, start digging, mix it into a pile, find the right nickel concentration, put it onto a truck, send it over to a barge, and get paid before the end of the day in terms of when it's loaded onto that barge. So it's the ease of production, but also the abundance of it. It's everywhere in the country.
So that would make Indonesia a very strategic country. Its
Absolutely
positioning in
does.
Southeast Asia, its proximity to China for access to the Class One upstream refinement, and it's just ease of getting it out of the ground. So then you got to get it out off the island. So can you tell me a little bit about those logistics?
Well, that's where I believe the Indonesian government was very, very smart. Up until 2019, you could go for the ore, export it back to your country, and that's all the Indonesian government and people are getting. The president at the time said, no, we're going to ban the export of ore and force people to come in and build refineries in country. At that time, there was about 2 or 3 refineries in 2019 in Indonesia. Now, fast forward just a few years, there are over 49 active nickel smelters and 8 HPAL processors in the country. To put that in perspective, there are 4 active smelters in Canada. There's 1 active pilot smelter refinery in the United States, just to give you a little bit of an understanding of just how big this industry became. And really, a lot of that, as of right now, was China. China came in and said, we will open up our checkbook. We will not just talk about it. We will build these refineries. We will do all these joint ventures with various different companies. And right now, they largely control the supply of those intermediate products. Then those intermediate products get sent abroad. In this case, a lot of it goes back to China, and that's where the refinery happens. So it's very important. You said, is this strategic? Absolutely it is. That's why the United States, as of earlier this year in the summer, signed its first bilateral trade agreement with Indonesia. The Trump administration did. That was something that also the Biden administration was working on, showing how bipartisan this current idea of doing business with Indonesia is. Then in September of this year, you saw both the EU and Canada both enter their first bilateral trade agreements with Indonesia as well. So now you're seeing the superpowers of the EU, Canada, and the United States all signing trade agreements. What does that tell you? Tells you that they know Indonesia is a battleground economically because it's the largest ASEAN country. It's going to be the 7th largest GDP on a PPP basis by 2030, and they have 285 million people there. That is not a small country. So it makes a lot of sense for why you're going to be there, but also we're coming from behind. China's been working on this for decades, and they put their money where their mouth is, and they have a very strong hold of it right now.
Yeah, when you say we're coming from behind, I mean, just think of World War II levels of manufacturing. If we needed to move quickly into building ships, armored plated ships, we needed to build the infrastructure and the implements of war. Where do we get the ore? Well, we got access to ore in some allied countries, but what do you do with it if there's not enough smelters? So then you're left at, if we're in a trade conflict or a hot conflict with China, then we'd run out, right? That's a real strategic problem. So nickel, it seems very common, seems to be no big deal. It's not on anybody's radar. We're talking about rare earths. It's not a sexy topic, but nickel is of great strategic importance. Nickel is a strategic metal. Can you tell me a little bit about nickel's uses and how dependent we are, as a society and a military?
Yeah, and there's 2 different answers to that. National defense and simply our way of life. If you think of nickel, obviously the first thing we think of is all of the steel, the stainless steel, everything we need to really build our society and our cities. But also it's used in electronics, it's used in aerospace, it's used in all these different things, in EV batteries, anything electrification, not just on the EV vehicles, but think of all the mowers and all these different things, the hand drills, everything is going electric. So you need to be able to have access to it. But I think the most important thing about this is the national defense and aerospace. If you look at why do you need nickel, specifically class 1 nickel, and it's because it's so good in high temperature, high stress environments. What are in those types of environments and why is that important? Well, think of turbine engines, your blades, your discs, your nozzles, anything that needs extreme heat or high stress. If you look at your naval vessels, so your Navy, again, your turbine machinery, but also corrosion-resistant pipes, seawater cooling systems, and structural components, and then armor vehicles. If you need something that is high strength, wear-resistant, but also blast and ballistic resistance, you need nickel for that. And then lastly, I don't think many people think about this, are the missiles, the rockets, and the hypersonic systems. Really, I would argue the things that really keep the world's powers at bay is having those weapons. All of those need nickel because those are in such an extreme environment of force, speed, and heat. If you don't have nickel for that, you don't have anything I just mentioned.
I mean, it's not just the plating, it's not just the exterior, it's also the wiring, the nickel wiring on the
Absolutely.
inside that requires heat resistance. Imagine a satellite that's going from extreme temperatures on the dark side of the Earth into the face of the sun in a vacuum. Extreme temperatures need to have a metal like nickel, which is at 80 to 90% its melting point, is still a stable metal for use in electronics. I mean, that's like you said, it's one of God's gifts to planet Earth, to mankind, kind of a late discovery too. But I mean,
Mhm.
Brandon, I really appreciate you coming on today. Brandon Colwell, you've been involved in the markets up in Canada for quite some time. You're involved in a very interesting nickel project in Indonesia right now. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on over there?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Indonesia, it is one of those battlegrounds for one of the major critical minerals, which is, of course, nickel. And as of to this point, we are currently the only revenue generating producer and licensed nickel trader in all of North America that has made and gained access into Indonesia's market. So over the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time working with dozens of various different exploration mining companies and really learning what investors are looking to see, what investors do not want to see, but more importantly, what are the things that we need as a society, and do we currently have it? Nickel is so dominantly controlled by Indonesia and their wealth of their laterite system, but also controlled by China, where they have funded a lot of the refineries that were there. So our goal is to first give investors access to the abundance of nickel in the country, but then also continue to build relationships where we're not only becoming a producer and a trader, but we are looking to also become land acquirers. So we have decades worth of production, but also starting to look at the possibility of making those relationships on the refining side so that one day we can be North America's only access to a completely non-FEOC supply chain of nickel coming back to the West.
All right. So what's the name of your company?
Nusa Nickel Corp.
How'd you come up with that name?
So Nusa means island in Indonesia, and it is the island of nickel. So hence we went with Nusa Nickel Corp. So I wanted to make sure we not only blended a little bit of the Indonesian culture in it, but also came up with something that was very unique, just like our company is as well.
No, no, I love the origin stories. I love how you got over there. I mean, what first tipped you off that Indonesia was a great target?
So if you asked me that same question 2.5 years ago, I wouldn't have an answer for you. I have been looking so much into all these critical minerals, but we in North America always think of hard rock nickel because Canada is so abundant of it. That's just what we've been doing for decades. I ran into who's now the president and COO of our company. I'd known him for a few years. His name's Robert Chandra. He's born and raised in Indonesia. He spent the first 45, 50 years of his life there. He worked with BP Petroleum, and then he did his hard rock geology degree at the University of Toronto. He's now been living in Canada since 2007 with his family. I bumped into him at a PDAC, which is the world's largest mining investment, basically a conference that every single March, if you haven't gone, I highly recommend checking it out because you'll have over 30,000 people from countries all over the world all talking about where's the next step, what should we be looking at. I bumped into him and said, hey, I've got this opportunity where I can go into production in a very short amount of time, become revenue generating within 12 to 18 months, which is unheard of in the exploration world. Usually that'll take you at least 3 to 5 years to even get to a point where you're building the actual refinery, you're building the actual mine. And he said he can do it on a very small budget. So I spent about 4 weeks going to all the geologists I spoke with, all the various different executives that I've known over the years, and I tried to kill the deal. One after the other just kept saying, I think you're actually onto something. I could not kill that deal. So in April of 2024, we decided to create the company. We raised $1.1 million. We went into Indonesia. And within the first 15 months, we went from a company idea into production and into revenue generation for our first shipment of $340,000 of nickel ore. So it was a fantastic journey thus far. We're still a private company. We just did our last raise before going public. Our go public raise will be in January, so that'll be the actual listing raise. And then we'll be listing on the TSX Venture. So very, very excited about the road ahead.
No, that's exciting origin story. So basically, folks that are listening to this, a lot of folks may have no experience in junior mining or how exploration happens in the strategic metal world. Then you also have folks that do understand the Canadian market. I mean, I think that I'm here in Oregon, grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and you think about the vast areas of Canada, and that's really what your investing network up there has the advantage over the United States. Is you guys are still like pioneers and explorers. You're out there doing at scale what the pioneers were doing with little pans and a creek or a riverbed up in California or Nevada or something. And so you guys have that appetite for for these like new exploratory missions, which maybe you're raising money off of a report from an engineer, and it's hopes and dreams. But it's a little different when you can go out to Indonesia and then run your hand over the soil and grab something that you know has value. I mean, what's that like to step into a deal that has visibility right there on the surface? It's got to be surreal.
Surreal and fantastic, because something that I've always looked for in a deal is how fast can you get into revenue generation. Too many companies think I'm going to build this massive multi-million dollar ounce deposit. It takes much, much time, years and years of drilling, and tens of millions at times, because you're in remote areas, you're going deep into the ground, you're going through mountains. So it can be very, very costly before you even get to a point of potentially getting to revenue generation. I knew I wanted something different for when I was going to jump into my own position as I am right now as the CEO of the company, but to raise funds from my network as well. I wanted something that stood out. So being able to actually go there, you get it. The moment you're on the ground, you understand it's everywhere. It's all shallow pit. As we were speaking earlier, it's truly God's gift to mankind, what they've done with weathering this, where it's all within 30 meters of essentially soil and clay, where I'm really simplifying this. Don't let my geologists hear this, because there absolutely is much more going on. But for investors hearing this, it really is. You're taking an excavator, you're scooping it, you're mixing it to a desired nickel concentration, you put it into a dump truck, and we drive 9 kilometers down the road where we sell it at the barge. And that's our process. So it's very, very simplified. So to be able to do that so quickly, to be able to find revenue generation within the first 15 months as a company and as a private company, it's very rare in this space. And that's why I was so interested with this idea of this company when it first came to me.
Well, tell me a little bit more about the on-site process, which I think is fairly unique, that you can get some refinement in terms of getting the resources more concentrated. So my knowledge is going to the gravel quarry down the road and watching them, do three-quarter minus with the screening, and then out pops out something that goes in the back of my truck, or in a 10-yard dump truck, and comes out to gravel our roads or something. So can you explain like what physically happens? So you got what, backhoes and bulldozers, and then it
Yeah.
goes into what next?
So excavators and bulldozers, that's what we're using, and of course dump trucks, where you would go onto site. It's called selective mining, where essentially every meter you're going down, you are checking for the concentration. So you go down a meter with an excavator, you take that out, you separate it, you send it out to a lab, and then you find out what you're dealing with there. A lot of this area, it goes in lenses. I can't call it homogeneous, even though it's very close to that, but it goes in lenses. Think of like a contact lens, where some of that lens could be 1.6% nickel. Then the next lens could be 1.2% nickel. So you've got to be able to separate that. Hence why before I said it is a little bit more complicated than I first made it. But that's why you have the specialty of Indonesia, and that's why they've become the world's most dominant nickel player, doing 63% of the world's nickel production last year, is because they have the expertise, but more importantly, they've got the infrastructure and they've got the deposit. So you get out there, you do those tests. From there, you start understanding, okay, this pile is 1.6%, this pile is 1.4%, etc. And you essentially build these domes and you burn them off into different areas where you store them. Then once you get to a certain amount, in our case, is 7,500 metric tons, that's what we put on a barge every single time. Then we tell ourselves, okay, we need to mix to this percentage. You mix that percentage, you get your assay tests, you start hauling, you bring that 9 kilometers down the road to where the barge is, you load up that barge and get payment on delivery. It really is, again, I use the word simple, but in the grand scheme of what mining usually is, that is incredibly simple. And that's why we're able to go to production so quickly. We couldn't have done that without Robert Chandra. If you don't have someone who is Indonesian, if you don't have someone who understands how their people work, how their local communities work, how the government works, you're at an extreme disadvantage. For us, it is our strategic advantage, having something like that, where I like to say we're 100% Canadian owned, 100% Indonesian operated.
We recently did a podcast episode with Colonel David Pedersen. He was a pilot in the Air Force. He's a very valuable member of Born Defense's advisory team, and he's a professional diplomat by training, right? I mean, he was a diplomat when he was uh, running sorties, right, expressing our force to the world, and a diplomat while he was helping train other folks to operate aircraft. And I look at your deal, and you're a diplomat too, right? Because you got to go in there and you've got to work an existing system. And I know a lot of mining deals that exist in Africa, for instance, and it's warlord dominated. So you're dealing with a lot of security teams. You're dealing with pretty disgusting systems. But Indonesia is different. It comes from a power from the top down, and there it seems to be It seems, I mean, it is more orderly. It's more transactional rather than like archaic violence dominated by just sheer force and might makes right. Can you tell me a little bit about your experiences there and how Indonesia is a different player on the global scale when it comes to mining diplomacy?
Absolutely. First and foremost, they're a democracy, just like we are. So unlike a lot of these countries where you have dictators running it, when you have dictatorships, you have a lot of that corruption that ensues. So first off, they're a democracy. Secondly, they are a government that is deeply, deeply enshrined and wanting to move forward their mining sector. That is rare. They are there to make sure that companies succeed, where a lot of the times, a lot of governments around the world, unfortunately, leave it up to just everyone to defend for themselves, and you have issues that happen. When they banned the export of ore, they made sure that everyone kept it in-house, and they built the refineries, they built all of the processing plants inside the country. So that's, again, a very smart move by the government. But also, they used their army to cut back on all the bad players. If you were doing things illegally, if you were mining where you shouldn't, if you didn't get your proper agreements for going into a certain forested area, you got your licenses taken away from you. You were penalized because they want to build this legal framework, which is very important in a third world nation. You need to make sure the government not only is pro-mining, but they also want to make sure that they are pro-producers and pro-refineries. People want to feel safe when they put their money there. That's the reason why the Senior Trade Commissioner for Canada that's in Indonesia, and also the EDC, Export Development Canada, they've been doing a lot of work recently on building relations with Indonesia. Like I spoke earlier about those bilateral trade agreements, how Canada, the United States, and the EU, all within the last 6 months, have all signed their very first bilateral trade agreements with Indonesia. They understand it's the largest ASEAN country. We need access there. So the EDC and the Senior Trade Commissioner for Canada are very, very much wanting to see more mining happen in the country. We've spoken to them outside the embassy personally. They want to see it succeed because they know the importance of it. But also they feel very comfortable with the government and knowing that the government is doing everything in their power to make sure things are orderly, making sure things are done in a more ESG manner, which is also very important, but also that there's security and there's safety for not only the workers that are there, but for the money that's invested there. And I've now been there twice myself as an outsider, as a Canadian coming in. I felt nothing but being warm and welcome. The people there are fantastic. And even the local communities, they're so pro-mining because there's a 14% VAT. That's essentially a royalty that comes from every metric ton that's produced. It's bringing their people out of poverty, where that immediately goes straight towards 40% goes to the local community, the other 40% goes to the local province, and the last 20% goes to the federal government. So if there's mining in the community, that community is now involved in it, and they want it to happen because we're hiring their people, they're getting money back from here, and quite literally, they're having roads paved and everything changed around them. It's the perfect environment that you want to be in, where there's still lots of opportunity, like you get in other third world countries, but there's a sense of order, which Indonesia absolutely has.
You know, as Born Defense, we strive to achieve the merits of like the just war doctrine, that justice is the backbone of everything we should be doing. You know, everything is a sum of choices. You go left, you go right. You try to make the best choice that's, willing the good of the other. And the America First mantra that's been, kind of moving forward in the United States, where we're putting our interests ahead of others because we have a duty, or our country has a duty to protect our citizens, like a CEO has a duty to its shareholders to protect its shareholders. We're doing this for our constituents, right? You're building a company for the shareholders. Now, Indonesia, back in 2014, when they first implemented this Indonesia First policy, they weren't going to be a colony. They weren't going to be exploited by these mining interests. They were going to be partners, and they were going to go put their citizens first. And other folks have followed that pattern over time, but it takes a couple things. It takes a just leader, and it takes a system that does not have corruption. So the theft of the profits are flowing back to his citizenry. That is, to do something like that in Indonesia. I mean, that should be a model for other nations. It should be a model for everything that we do. You have resources. Every war is fought over resources. It's not about religion. It's about some pretext to get access to the resources. Indonesia has a resource that it's exploiting for its citizens. How unique is that as far as you've seen in other mining deals?
I think it's very unique. I think one of the biggest things, it'll always be the biggest thing, is the geopolitical issues in your government when it comes to, can I actually get my permits? Can I actually take into production? Can I actually make sure that my operations keep going and the government's going to come and seize my area or seize my production? That's never happened in the history of Indonesia for all of its nickel industry. Nothing has ever been seized unless, and I'm happy by this, recently, even the larger players were mining in areas they did not get approval by the Ministry of Forestry, meaning that they should not go there. They did not get the approval. They
Theft.
had
It's
that.
theft.
It's that, but it's also there's a reason why there's that ministry to make sure that you're mining in a responsible manner for the environment. So the largest players bringing in the most money to the government through that VAT and through all their other taxes, they took away parts of their their mining permit, and that's setting the stage. That's telling you, I don't care how big you are, you have to follow by the rules. Well, at the same time, if you follow by the rules, we will lay it out for you. We will make it so that you can prosper, that people can prosper, and we can all make money from that. It's so important. I think what North America has lacked for a long time, even though we spoke about how much production of oil and other minerals happen in the United States and Canada, we've been much more talk than we have been action. We've allowed a lot of these projects. I always think of the Keystone Pipeline between the U.S. and Canada. That pipeline would have been so influential for Canada and the United States. And we allowed other aspects to get in the way of that. Our governments were not pushing that, especially the Canadian government. They were not pushing for that. What does that tell other people that want to invest in your country now? That you can spend hundreds of millions of dollars, even $1 billion more, and you can't be certain that you'll get the right permits to go forth. That's a scary thing for financiers. It's a scary thing for businesses. It's a scary thing for investors. And I think America was the first to really start understanding between the West back in, I think it was February 2021, where the Biden administration finally said, okay, we need to find out how reliant are we on these critical minerals. And they wanted a 100-page report. That report came back with astonishing details, basically stating of the vast majority of the critical minerals that you need for energy, aerospace, national defense. We do not only have the supply of it domestically, but that it is dominantly controlled by China. That led into your current Trump administration, where now you're continually putting more resources into your nations. I mean, if you look at the DOE, they committed $1 billion for critical mineral projects since August of 2025 this year. The DoD has also committed almost $540 million to date in critical mineral projects. They're actually going into specific companies. The DoD invested $35 million in a company called Trilogy Metals, a Canadian company. So you're also seeing cross-border investment because America and now Canada, and I believe all of the West realizes, yes, it's America first. You need to bring that refinery and manufacturing back to the country. But you also have to ask yourself, where is the upstream? Where is the raw ingredients, the raw critical minerals that we need? It may not be as abundant in our country, but where is it in the world where we can still have good political alliances with? Indonesia is one of those countries. Brazil is one of those countries. Peru and Chile, all for their own reasons. This is where we need to do, I think, what China has done for the last several decades. They saw an opportunity, they put their checkbooks and they put their money behind it. Now it's time for us to do the same, and we're playing catch up. But that doesn't mean that we can't catch up.
I mean, that's diplomacy with capital, right? Because the Belt and Roads Initiative that China's done over here in the Western Hemisphere, how they've invested not only capital but technology into Indonesia for the refinement process, that has put them in the driver's seat of extraction all the way upstream to their class one portfolios. How many Western controlled or Western influenced refineries are active right now in Indonesia?
Zero. They are all, even so Ford is out there as well. Ford is building a $4.5 billion HPAL processing plant, but if memory serves correct, they're tied up with Tingxing, so it's doing a joint venture. Well, Tingxing is one of the large stainless steel companies in China. The RTFs and the HPALs are all licensed technology from China. So whether China is just indirect ownership because you did a joint venture with a company, or whether they directly own it through one of their state-owned companies, I would argue 95% or above of the processing and smelting technology is controlled by China in one way or another. And again, that's because Indonesia is, although they've joined BRICS, they are very much, we will not take a side. They want to work with the West. They want to work
with Indonesia first.
They want to work at Indonesia first. Let's make the best deals. And up until this point, China has been smarter in the sense of they put their money where their mouth was. When that ban was happening, I found out that back in 2020 or 2021, Indonesia actually approached the Canadian government saying, do you want to essentially join our OPEC? Because Indonesia is more of an OPEC to nickel than Saudi Arabia is to oil. And we deny it. We declined it. That just goes to show that I don't have those answers. I wasn't in the rooms. I just know that we had the discussions and it never went forward. Maybe thinking that they didn't have what it takes because we thought we were the kings of nickel. Well, that's really changed over a very, very short amount of time, 5 or 6 years. It's unprecedented. So we need to make sure that moving forward, we find access to this. So our goal, if I can just move really quickly, is that we want to go in there and become producers. We want to become traders. We want to start building our footprint there. But also, we want to start building relationships with possible alternatives or various different processes or processors or smelters that are not controlled by an FEOC, a foreign entity of concern, so that we can have a full supply chain that we can then start bringing back to the West as well, which I know Indonesia wants to find. They want to diversify, just like how the United States, Canada, everyone right now is looking to diversify where they're trading with or who they're trading with and how much. Indonesia is very much dominated by China because they're right there. They understand each other. There's a lot of money come over. But like any nation, you want to say, okay, maybe I need to diversify a bit. And hence why you saw these bilateral trade agreements with the EU, Canada, and the United States. They're thinking that as well.
I'm thinking it now. I mean, if you always ask, cui bono, like who benefits? So like the Keystone Pipeline example. I mean, who benefited from that? I mean, Warren Buffett, right?
Yeah.
The railways, the shale producers, obviously renewable energy folks. Was it about the pretext of what they were claiming, the social and cultural pretext, or was it about who benefited financially? And right now we know who benefits financially from Indonesia. Well, it's whoever has a seat at the table. I mean, you're in Canada. You're descended from pioneers, explorers, and settlers. The folks that stayed home back in the UK. God bless them. They don't have that pioneering spirit that a lot of us here in North America have. And now what you've done is you've identified an opportunity. You've parachuted into an island nation. Like the analogy from island hopping in World War II isn't lost on me because there's resources there. It's not an airfield, like World War II style, but it's a resource that the OPEC sort of levels of control. And now you've got a country like Indonesia. We talk about just war doctrine, but in one of our previous podcasts, Dr. Eric Patterson, he corrected me, and he says a better way to talk about it is just statecraft. So when you're having someone come in and exploit a law, they're not getting the proper permits. They're committing, what's equivalent to theft. They're taking something that's not theirs, and so you have to deal with them justly. Now, would a corrupt nation with a totalitarian dictator have turned to those folks and say, "Pay me," and enrich themselves further? Absolutely. I mean, that's sort of the African and playbook, right? The African dictator playbook is you line your pockets and there's disorder and poverty everywhere. Whereas Indonesia is taking a different angle there. But what I wonder, if we needed to do the shipbuilding, we needed to do build these electronics, these real high level refineries and advanced metallurgy for electronics. What do we do? I mean, yeah, we could have a convoy that protected the resource coming from Indonesia to North America. Well, we can't do that right now because it has to be processed there because of Indonesia's infinite wisdom. They're protecting their people. So either we need to negotiate a treaty that says in wartime we'll be allowed to extract this and we'll pay you tenfold for the resource, or we need to invest in refineries. So you've already talked about China's influence there. Now, where would that technology come from if not licensed by China? Do we have the technology in the West to do this? Was it laterite? Is that the name of the?
Laterite, yeah.
Yeah, that refinery?
I believe we do. So refining and downstream processing is where we are the most vulnerable. Yes, you can find the ore for a lot of different things, a lot of different critical minerals out there, but can you refine it? We did a very good job. I would say the United States did a very good job. Canada is still a little bit behind on this point, but on gas and nat gas and diesel, there's a lot of refineries in the country. So now you've got sole control over the main source of your energy. That's very, very important. But refining and manufacturing, we're very far behind in our knowledge, where our focus has been a lot more, if we stick with the United States, a lot more on the technology for fintech and technology and pharmaceuticals and all these other things where that's where the money's flowing. Because if the money is flowing somewhere, you'll get people studying that spot and become smarter. It hasn't been flowing in the refining and manufacturing for decades. We've been outsourcing that for so long. It's almost like we forgot how to build it at home. So do we have that knowledge? I believe we do. I've already spoken with 3 different companies that claim they can crack the code of the laterite and they can do something where it would not be an HPAL processor. It would not be the RKF smelter. But that takes money. That takes time. That takes resources in order to go out there and say, okay, I need the money to go out there and to test this facility and make sure it actually works. That's very difficult when the money, the institutions, your brokers, the banks, their minds aren't quite there for wanting to fund that. They'd rather give $100 million to a random tech company than $1 million to a potential processing technology. That is fundamentally an issue of ourselves and where our priorities are. That's why in recent years, I believe that is finally shifting. I believe we are putting our money where our mouth is, but more specifically, the average North American is thinking of critical minerals, like I would argue, like never before. You spoke about rare earths recently. Rare earths, it is so detrimental to our nation and our security not having rare earths because of the permanent magnets that you get from it and the semiconductors that you need from it, where right now 90% plus of that comes from China. So what happens if there's a geopolitical, say it's just economical. They decided the tariffs are too high, I'm cutting you off. Now you can't have the permanent magnets that you need in your EV vehicles. You can't have the permanent magnets that you need in your military vehicles. You don't have the semiconductors that you need. There's so many different things there. This is just an example of how we need to start actually putting focus towards that. So back last year in 2024, the DoD awarded $94 million for a permanent magnet facility in the United States. I saw that as a sign of, okay, maybe we're starting to actually put our money where our mouth is. The problem there is actually the reverse, though. Where is the ore of that? Where's the raw material? Well, a lot of that is in China, but it's also in Brazil in their ionic clays. So again, I'm going a little bit over here, but what I want to try to get our listeners and our watchers to understand is we need to think down these paths. If we're going to build processing the refinery, where do you get the raw material? If we're going to have the raw material, where are we going to refine? Both those things are so important, and for so long, we've outsourced it. We need to bring that home. The trouble is, when we are building, let's say, I looked in this a little while ago, a smelter in Indonesia can go from concept to being in production, so your feasibility study is about 6 months. And then to actually build it is about 9 to 12 months. So in a year and a half, you can go from, I want to build a smelter to my smelter is built. Try doing that in North America. You'll be 2 years at least in the feasibility study because you got to talk to the native communities. You got to talk to the various level of governments. You got to make sure you do all these action plans to make sure there isn't a certain bird in that area that you can't relocate. And there's just so much other red tape that's there of time and money. When if you're going to ask me, give me $1 billion, would you want to put that into an RKEF, a smelter in Indonesia? Would you want to put it into Canada? Strictly from an economic standpoint, from an economical standpoint of what makes more sense for your dollar, 10 out of 10 times I'm saying Indonesia. But if you ask me for what you would want to do for national defense and the importance to your country, that starts changing the equation. So we need to both make it easier for companies to operate, but our governments really need to step up. And they need to be able to prove to people who have the money, if you put the money in and you can prove, look, you're not completely destroying a nation, you're not completely destroying a city of its water. Obviously, you have to check for that. But if you can prove that that money is safe, more money will come in. And then you'll start seeing the processing coming back to North America. Then you'll start seeing the refinery coming back. I believe Trump is doing that with tariffs and other means, and it is working. But how long can that work before people start pivoting and saying, okay, maybe I'll start, give me 2 or 3 years, I'll go elsewhere. You need to make it so that the incentive is to build it without tariffs or anything like that. Make it so that you can feel safe about your money in our countries. I think we're starting that. I think we have a long way to go still.
Yeah, I mean we've got so you've got to build the facilities. In order to do that, you've got to go through all this red tape. And then, God bless America, God bless Canada. We got to the point in civilization where we could say, you know what, we don't need to ramp up these highly advanced technological capabilities that are, old school, like the foundries. Like if you're playing a civilization game, the basic technologies that who cares? We'll do fintech. We'll do supercomputers. We'll do fun things. I mean, cyber defense, one of the greatest threats. I mean, we need technology for that. But at the end of the day, kinetic weapons and transportation on the seas, secure armored, shipbuilding and all that. That's logistic. That's getting things from point A to point B, and you need all these things throughout the process. Not only the technology, but the trained people. Like, where does that
Hmm.
come from? Let's say I wanted to start something in Indonesia. I wanted to say, give me a price tag. I'm not going to hold you to it, and this is a forward-looking statement, but give me a price tag. If I wanted to have a Western-controlled um, and Western-influenced refinery where I can get from the ground to something that can be exported off the island, like what's the price tag on that?
What's the price tag on national defense? What's the price tag on security? There's an actual price tag of going into production, buying these things and putting it together. If you're looking at that, we've spoken with various different parties that are looking to do smaller modular processors, and that is currently not Chinese technology. And they're looking at around 150 to 250 million dollars USD. In the grand scheme of things, very, very small when you talk about refineries and all that, but that would allow a full FEOC supply chain to happen. But then on top of that, even if you have to spend the money on new technology and you have to burn those millions of dollars of testing that, what is the cost of national security? What is the cost of making sure that nickel, in this instance, and what we're talking about, that you can have that full supply chain? I would say that's almost priceless, because what happens in the worst case scenarios? God forbid, I hope they never happen. I hope we never have to do this, and it's all about us just planning for what could happen. What happens if, for whatever reason, China says, okay, we're cutting you off? What do you do then? And what if the worst case scenario came up and we're not just cutting you off, we're actually going into a war, which I hope I never see in my lifetime between the two superpowers of the world. But what happens? You have to prepare for that. A really good example of that is rare earths. We saw earlier this year that China, I believe in response to Trump's tariffs, started putting an export ban on their rare earths. That was immediately picked up by the Trump administration. He came out and I think it was 100 or 110% blanket tariffs on everything. That brought them back to the table, and they started negotiating. I believe those tariffs came off, but I also believe that the export ban was very much de-escalated. But that just goes to show that China knows they have the power to do this in certain ways, and the United States now understands if they do that, how important it is. So they got to come guns a-blazing to make sure that doesn't happen. You can only have that standoff so many times before a shot is fired. And again, I believe the analogy I want to say is economically. So I need to pause myself because I was already halfway through saying that expression. But you have to make sure that what happens if they say, no, we're not going to go back on this. And now people put their foot in the ground. What are you going to do? So again, we come back to what is the potential price tag? What is the worth of that? I would argue exceptionally low, especially when you start looking at the national defense budget that you guys have in the United States. What you need to get that whole supply chain is a drop in the bucket. I think it's important. It's not just nickel, though. It's in rare earths. It's in copper. It's in silver. Silver is a fantastic one where obviously we can use that both in an industrial standpoint, but also as money. Look at the price of gold right now. The price of gold will tell you that we're in a crisis. There is no reason that it's $4,000 USD and above, other than it is worried about the debt of the world. It's worried about the geopolitical tensions that are around the world, but also a lot of these nations, where's that gold going? That gold over the last 3 to 4 years has almost primarily been going to Russia, China, Brazil, and others. Why do you think they're doing that? Because they understand that fiat currency is fickle. Fiat currency can be devalued very easily. Gold is gold, and it stood the test of time. So now a lot of nations are saying, okay, we need gold because we might go back to a gold standard or something close to that. So again, as a society, we need to be thinking about it more. We need to understand that if the government makes it so that you can get a mine put into production, and you can get the support, whether it's financially or just through red tape, just through political means, you can get your refinery and processing technologies in-house. Now, the next question as a business person would be, okay, where are my skilled laborers? Where are my skilled technicians? Where are the metallurgists? Where are the scientists? Where are the people that are going to help me get better and be able to build this? If you build that pathway for the jobs, people will go to school to fill those jobs. That's what's happening in China right now. I have to paraphrase because I can't remember the exact degree, but let's call it metallurgy. Metallurgy is the study of how metals interact and how to separate them. When you get an ore body, it's usually not just nickel. It's not just copper. There's a lot of other things, and you have to smelt it down, you have to process it, acid leaching, you name it. That takes a skill to be able to do that. In China, every year, there are hundreds of thousands of people graduating from these types of fields. In the United States, there's mere hundreds or a few thousand. That is a very serious problem because you need to give the incentive for people to go through that schooling, but you need people to come out with that schooling. Because you can have all the resources in the world, you can have all the refineries, you don't have the brain to be able to operate it, to be able to make it more efficient, more ESG friendly. It's not going to happen. You're going to have to license technology from other areas. Well, then where are you licensing that technology? It's probably coming from China because they've done such, I want to say, incredible work over the last several decades, making this an importance of not just their people, their nation. It's from top to bottom. We need to do that in the West.
No, that's incredibly well put. I mean, we're in a position right now that if you're forward looking, you can see, well, we can get the processed material off of Indonesia. We got a navy, so if we were in a time of war, there'd be convoys going from Indonesia back to where we can turn it into, put it into steel, nickel into steel. I mean that we have the technology for that. We have the resources, but right now it's kind of an interesting flexion point. There's somebody in Indonesia right now that's working on a project that could eventually get nickel off the island in a final product without relying on a potential adversary. Like we just heard Trump talking the other day on 60 Minutes. He was asked, what happens if China invades Taiwan? His answer was, none of your effing business. That's in my head. I'm not gonna tell you. But I mean that's negotiation. That's diplomacy. But what does happen if tensions rise? Maybe not a hot war, but a trade war. Where do we get this valuable, but it seems ubiquitous. It's nickel. We think of it as, I don't think many Americans have any idea of the importance of nickel. I mean, they don't even realize that nickel is what keeps our DNA from being destroyed by the furnace of the sun. So what how do we educate a populace? Well, the way you do it is if you build it, they will come, right? So you've got some smart capital in your deal. I mean, you've invested your own money into your deal, I presume, and
Absolutely.
some of your friends and colleagues that you vouch for the deal and they believe in you. So you guys see the future. You have a vision of where Indonesia and Canada, North America, our allies are linked together through trade, through agreements, through the deployment of capital, and through building something of value. And that's what we need to do, and every level. We need to do it for every strategic mineral, every strategic metal. That's incumbent upon us. And then at some point, we've got to develop the technology. We got to educate the people. So this is a 50-year plan, a 20-year plan. I mean, there's Generation Alpha out there, which will be the strong men from the bad hard times that are going to come out of the back of this, right? We're kind of like on the end of an empire, right? We become soft, we become complacent, we become safe. We've got order, we've got safety, we've got everything we could want to need, and we still complain about it, being the worst time ever, even though this is the best time in the history of civilization for virtually every level. And in the future, we've got to be ready for the what's next. And the what's next is potential war, potential constraints in trade. And that's really what your project is all about, the what next. Like what happens? What if we need this strategic metal and we can't get the processed materials from an adversary? I mean, think of NP2 nickel wire and electronics and Russia's manufacturing of that and their capabilities. We can't even do that in the West. We don't have the people. We could build them, but we're not. And if we needed to build them in a crunch, I mean, how many years does that take? And you're telling me the timeline in Indonesia is relatively short. So put on your grab out your crystal ball or something. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the future? Now, this is a forward-looking statement. I know that makes anybody in business that's going after investments kind of nervous. So we're going to qualify this in a big way. But I want your perspective, because you're out there in the trenches. Literally, you have people out in the trenches. You've been out there literally, grabbing the dirt and looking at them, look what's up in them there hills. And there's probably no hills, it's probably flatland, but you've got the vision. So tell me a little bit about what makes you nervous, but what also makes you hopeful. Like there's a problem, we've identified that. You've identified some potential solutions, but what does the future look like? Like when you're having drinks with friends and talking about the safety of Western civilization and your part in it, because I'm sure you realize the significance of your position right now and what you're doing, to help mankind in Indonesia. Like, what's the future look like?
Well, if we don't do anything, the future looks very bleak. And that is worrisome and concerning. And hence, again, why I believe all of our governments in the West are acting upon this because they're seeing the doomsday. The issue is, let's pick if China went into Taiwan. That is one of the worst case scenarios I can possibly think of because that will set a geopolitical, let's just say economic first. I believe that leads to more. And if that happens, to put something currently into production in, let's say, Canada, because I know that very well, you're talking anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20 years. The 20 is obviously in the longer end, but you're quite literally looking at 5 to 10 years just to put something into production. Then once you put it into production, then you have to refine it. Once you refine it, then you have to make it into the end products. But along the way, you need, like we were speaking earlier, you need the training of individuals. You need the actual supply chain. You can't just make it and have no one buy it. So you need to make sure you get all the demand for that as well. That is a very long process. Whereas in other countries, say in Indonesia, we went from clicking yes on essentially creating our company and our corporate documents to being in production and being a revenue generating producer within 15 months. That's the speed in which other countries operate. So we either, one, have to make that the speed we operate back at home or close to it, or two, we need to build the alliances with these countries where we have our own supply chains there, where even if tensions happen, we can still bring back the minerals that we need. Because if we don't, like we spoke about just a few things. We only spoke about nickel and rare earths, and we mentioned copper. There's gallium, there's scandium, there's all these other elements that we need that if we don't have it, the simplest things like the screens, if we don't have boron, we don't have the screens or our cell phones or skyscraper windows. No one will even think of that before. But that's how reliant we've become on the rest of the world. And I do believe we're in a new era. I do believe that what happened after World War II, of everyone coming together, trading with each other, building alliances, all this kind of stuff, something has happened. I don't know how big. I'll let the people much smarter than I am answer that question, but something has happened. There has been a shift, and now we are in a new era. We need to be aggressive in ensuring that at the very least, the things that make our society tick, the things that we take for granted on a daily basis of our cars, our radios, our laptops, our satellites, our TVs, our homes, everything, we need to be able to say, if the worst case scenarios happened, we're not going back to the Stone Age. And right now, if that happened tomorrow, we would go back to the Stone Age. We cannot do it in North America. We cannot do it in the West. We need the rest of the world. So we need to be putting those footprints down. So for Nusa Nickel, the way that I see this, with myself being a born and raised Canadian, Robert being born and raised in Indonesian, but now he's built his whole family in Canada since 2007, we want to see this cross-country alliance of working with these two countries that have very similar values. They're both democracies. They want to see things pushed forward, and they want to do more trade with each other. We want to see Canada and Indonesia build the relationships, but the rest of ASEAN countries as well. Because we've been so focused on the countries that we know, the United States, the EU, Australia. There are many other countries out there, and they're all rich in resources. And I personally believe that North American values can go in, and I believe there'll be higher values than other nations that go in. And they take advantage of those people, and they destroy the land around them. I don't believe we would do that. I believe we would have a cut above. And if the governments see that we are willing to put our paychecks there, they want to work with us because they like the values that Canada, the United States, and the West bring, because they know that we care about people, we care about the environment. So yes, we will use those resources. Everyone will make money off those resources, but I believe we'll do it in a more responsible manner than a lot of other countries in the world. That's important. So for us, we want to build. Right now, it's nickel. Tomorrow, it could be other things. It could be scandium. It could be any of these things, rare earths that we need. But you gotta get that foothold. And if you're a company out there, you need to be able to showcase that you can get into revenue quickly. You can show a proof of concept. You can show on this amount of money, we only raised $2 million to date, Canadian, and we've been in production. To put that in perspective, that's not even a drill program for one season for a hard rock company looking for gold or anything else. That's probably half a drill program. We are now in production. So to be able to do that and then say, okay, here's the pathway to exponentially grow. I've already shown you the blueprint. Now we're looking to raise the capital to take it to the next level. There are other examples out there. I don't know if it's as good as Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in my life for how quickly you've done it. Because again, God did the work at weathering this material and making it all at surface. But Brazil has the ionic clays. Those ionic clays have a lot of rare earth in them, and that's too is on surface and just need to dig to get it. So there's other places in the world we need to keep our eyes open, find ones that have good relationships and trade and really can be allies or very close to it. And we need to put our money where our mouth is. It's not just talk about, oh, China did this, China was smart with what they did. They put their checkbook first. It's time for the United States and Canada and the rest of the West to do the same. So very excited for what we have ahead of us for Nusa Corp. We're going public next quarter, and we're going on the TSX Venture. Very excited about the ability to one day potentially be the entire supply chain that can be influenced by the West with Indonesian citizens as our main drivers in our business. So working alongside the company, not taking advantage of the country, but then also be able to bring that back to the West. That's just one critical mineral. There's some 50 some odd more that we have to worry about. But if I can handle at least one of those right now, I think we've done a service to our country, to investors, and really to the countries that we're going into, because we are bringing that level above everyone else on the ESG side of things, where we do care about the people and the environment around us. I think all of that can work in harmony together, and that's what I'm excited to do with Nusa.
I mean, we're talking about just statecraft in general. It requires just men. It requires people that go in there, and you're a steward of finances. Like when you raise money, you owe these fiduciary duties to your shareholders, but you're holding them, basically capital and stewardship for God, for the will of God. You're trying to do good, and part of doing good is fulfilling your promises to your investors, right? Because that's your first duty of loyalty. But us in the West, when we go into a country to exploit, to pull resources out of the ground, we do it with transparency. We're not a closed nation. We've got free press, and now thanks to Elon Musk, we've got the ability to say whatever we want anytime we want on Twitter. And so if bad things happen with capital, if it's deployed in Indonesia, for example, in a corrupt way, people will find out about it. Like the days of these hidden exploitations with the State Department, the neocons running around, really damaging the United States interests abroad for the pretext of helping the oligarchs or the large companies. Those days are over, because what America First means to me, it means our values. It means our values first, your duties to your family, then the duties to your neighborhood. Watching out for the older lady down the street, checking on them when the power goes out. Then you go to your larger community, that you're able to help one another. And those communities are the basis of our civilization. So duty to country, and then above everything else, a duty to to virtue, doing the right thing, willing the good of the other, which is the definition of love. So if you go in with capital, we're not colonists. We're not going out there to steal and exploit. We're going out there with a duty to our families to spend your time doing a good job, so you can make your time valuable, right? You're out there doing your thing because it's in your best interest, in the best interest of your shareholders. But when you deploy capital responsibility with that litmus test of transparency, making sure that if something is exploitive, people will know. I mean, that's the beauty of Western investment. That's why our potential allies, these potential partners, should choose us to do business with. Because why? Because we can be trusted. We can be trusted. Not just that we're not going in there just to have a foothold so we can conquer a small country. We're not trying to exploit. Yes, we're trying to add value and ROI for our investors, but we're looking for teamwork here. We're looking to recruit the local people, the local governments, to help everybody, because you got capital, you got technology, You got the knowledge, the culmination of everything Western civilization has ever done, and we need to secure these resources. Because if we don't do it, someone who doesn't have just statecraft as their mantra is going to do it. There will be individuals that control nations that will hoard these resources for their own personal glorification. And if and I can't really stress this enough, but entrepreneurship, like going out there, guys like you, Brandon, going out there and seeing a problem, maybe it's a small segment, a small solution to a small problem, but everybody doing that right now, that's why I have hope. Like I'm not scared about the future. I'm not scared about, oh, China had an advantage. Oh, great. We're the sleeping giant, whatever. We're looking at our watch, sitting on the sidelines, staring at our screens, getting fat on sugary foods, whatever. United
Yeah.
States can handle that. Canada can handle that. We'll come back. We'll cut weight. We'll train. We'll train our kids. Generation Alpha is going to come in here and kick some ass, and our grandchildren, our descendants, will be the beneficiaries of risk takers like you and your investors. So thank you for what you're doing, Brandon, and I look forward to hearing more. I want to have you back on to talk about these other rare earth minerals and metals. Nickel. It's not very sexy, but let's make nickel great again. Let's tell that story. But there's other stories to be told, and you're an expert. So I appreciate you joining us and telling us what you know. And I look forward to watching you guys move forward in this project.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure. I love having these conversations because hopefully from this, people are learning. And from that learning, just like you said, they start getting passionate. And to use an old expression, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. We know there's an upward battle. We know when you do all these different things, we have to take steps. And those steps turn into leaps and turn into running. And before you know it, we'll look back and realize we've caught up. So it starts at small. It can grow so big. So thank you so much for the time on here. I look forward to coming back on and speaking with you again.
Thanks, Brandon.